Hey guys, my name is Ryan. I work here at Speed UTV in the service department, and today I'll be showing you how to grease and remove and install an axle. All right, here's the tools you're going to need to remove and install an axle. You'll need an 1/8 inch T-handle, 8 to 10 inches long. You'll need a 3/8 drive ratchet with a 4mm Allen socket on it. You'll need a 30mm impact socket, a 19mm impact socket, and a 1/2 inch drive impact gun. And the first thing we're going to do here is take the wheel off. Pop that down. And then here on the hub, you'll see there are 3 bolts here holding your axle nut retainer on. So this is where the 4mm Allen comes into play. You'll need that to pull these out to be able to pull your lock nut off for the hub. We'll go ahead and pull these off. They're usually a little tight. They have a lock washer on them as well as a regular washer. Factory usually throws a little bit of Loctite on them. Just back them off. Then usually you can get them out by hand after a certain point. Set that there, spin these out now. You could also use the E-ratchet to do this to speed it up a bit. It's just these are so small. I usually like to do them by hand just so they don't have any issues with snapping off. I've had it happen a few times just when they have too much Loctite on them, so just to be careful. These ones have a little bit more Loctite on them, so take a little bit to come out. And they thread pretty deep into the hub just so you have no issues with them if they back off. Now that you can pull your axle nut retainer plate off, there's your axle nut and the washer that goes with it. So we'll go ahead and pull those off with our 1/2 inch impact and the 30mm impact socket. These are normally very tight. There's that. There's your axle nut and washer assembly. So these can come apart. So just make sure that they go in the correct orientation. This has a concave surface that needs to go towards the hub. Now to get enough slack in this system here to pull this axle out, we have to take off this sway bar link right here. And then it'll let the trailing arm drop just a little bit extra and allow us that room to pull it all apart. Push down on the whole system. It'll drop a little bit here once we get the tension off everything. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and pull the lock nut out and locking assembly out of the transmission here on the stub of the axle. So there are 2 holes in the bottom of the frame here that allow you to get this T-handle up through there and aligned with your lock nut. So to get to those, we'll rotate this over until your lock nut in there aligns. You'll feel the T-handle engage in it. Your lock nut assembly is on the tapered surface of the cup here. So there is 1 locking nut in here, or more of a little set screw. So this is the first thing you'll pull out. You want to make sure that's fully unthreaded, and then go ahead and set it aside somewhere where you won't lose it. And then once we get in here, you're going to feel a second screw. That's your actual axle retainer, and that's what puts tension on the clip in there to hold everything together. So you're going to want to go ahead and back that off 2.5 turns to let it disengage the axle from the transmission. They're usually pretty tight. So there's a 1/2 turn, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. Then that'll disengage this cup here from the transmission, and we can go ahead and start pulling this axle out. Now that we've pulled the lock nut and this retainer out, we can go ahead and slide this cup out. It'll pop out there. And then you'll have to kind of plunge the whole assembly. Along with pulling the sway bar link out, we're going to pull this bottom shock bolt here to allow this trailing arm to droop enough to get this axle out. So here is, in this trailing arm, there's an assembly with a little kind of spacer in here that will tension up onto the shock here, so everything stays tight. It's basically an automatic little spacer in there. So we're able to pull the axle out once this trailing arm is drooped out of the way. You could either do it this way, or another way we could do it is pull this rear section of the cage out. There's 8 M10 bolts that you have to pull to do that. When you're on a lift, this is the easier way to do it, but if you're just on the ground doing it and on the floor in a shop, you'll want to pull this cage off because you can't really droop the arm down far enough to do that. So that's the two really kind of easier methods to pull this out. Another way is to pull this whole hub and carrier assembly off, but that's a lot more work. So this is the method we do in the shop here when we're on a lift. So on our axles, we have this clip here, and that's what retains the axle in the housing. The reason we go 2.5 turns out is because when we go all the way in with this clip expands over the splines so it can't slip past. And that's what holds our axles into the trans. So what we do is we go 2.5 turns out. There's half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. And now that clip is sunk below the splines and we could slip that axle in and out. When you're throwing the axle back in, you want to make sure it goes in that whole 2.5 turns, or else you know that this axle is not fully seated in the transmission and it could pop out. That's why we do this, just as a double check to make sure everything's in there and you'll be able to drive it safely without having any issues later on. All right, so now this axle can go back in the car. We're just going to reverse the process of pulling it out. We go ahead and throw the outer end into the hub first because it has a longer shoulder. So it'll allow for a little bit more clearance of this side slipping past that cage once this is fully engaged. So go ahead and take the axle here, pick up your arm. We'll fully engage that into there. You'll see all the threads sticking past, so you know it's in. Then you're going to take this up, swing it up and through, and then now you're fully set with your axle ready to slide back in. What we normally do here is go ahead and throw this shock bolt back in just to hold everything in place while we're getting all this situated. That's all through. All right, now we'll go ahead and get this end of the axle back in. Just a nice touch that we do is we line up your lock screw and your grease port on both sides just so everything's even. If you can get one out, you can get both out at the same time without having to rotate the wheels. This is really helpful if you're on the trail and you need to pull anything apart and your car isn't fully suspended off the ground, just so everything goes smooth. You don't have to try to roll a car with one wheel off and everything apart. It just makes everything just a lot simpler and a lot better of a time working on it. So I got one more spline up. I usually just set them both straight back and then I'll rotate it back to where it needs to be to access all the lock screw. So now that axle is fully seated in, I take it out and I push it against, make sure it's fully engaged into the transmission. So then we'll take our T-handle here and go ahead and tighten all this back up. So we had it 2.5 turns out. Now we want to make sure it goes the full 2.5 back in, so we know everything's seated. So we're gonna go 1, or half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. Just tighten it a little bit. And now we'll go ahead, and I like to just test it, make sure it's not gonna want to pop past. So now I know that clip in there is fully expanded and holding the splines of this axle against the splines inside the transmission past the locking point. So we're gonna have no issues with this axle popping out when we're driving. So now we're gonna put the locking set screw back in to the axle. So we're just gonna make sure it Threads in nice and straight. Run this down until it engages with the other screw in there. Give it a little twist, and there you go. Now your inner cup is all locked down into the transmission. All right, as you might have noticed, on this specific car, one of the axle boots was crushed in a little bit. That's because it's not allowed to vent properly and travel on the axle shaft. So we actually have a solution for that. These are speed CV sliders. These install super simple. They go in between the axle shaft and the boot, and they allow the boot to travel freely on the axle and vent properly. These are a really great add-on for the car and just let everything kind of work smoother. You can find these on our website. Next step, we're gonna go ahead and get this axle nut back on this end on the hub. I just spin them down by hand, and just so I could kind of ensure all the threads are good. There's no issues with this. Nothing got nicked when it was off the car, so that doesn't have an issue either. Then we'll take our 1/2-inch drive impact with our 30mm socket. We're just gonna run this down generally until it stops spinning. Just so we know, that's kind of like roughly the torque that this needs to be at. So right there, it stopped spinning. Now we will check with our lock plate here that one of these two sets of slots aligns with the threaded holes here in the hub. That one doesn't go. So let's see about this set of them. That one doesn't work either. So to get these to line up, we're gonna keep tightening this until it gets to a point where either of those sets of holes lines up. You wanna make sure you're going tighter, not looser, just so you're not losing torque on this nut, because you do not want that to start loosening and messing stuff up on the hub. Now we'll try that. See where we're at. Just little bits at a time. Doesn't take much to get them to align. Right there. Now we're almost dead center in those slots, so we can start threading our 3 locking bolts back in there. I usually just get one set all the way down, and then it holds this plate on here. So there's one, fully threaded in. Make sure they're going in straight, because it's not fun having to try to extract a cross-threaded bolt. Just get these all ran in by hand. You can almost get these lock washers compressed by hand as well. These don't take hardly any torque because they're only an M5 bolt, almost equivalent to a number 10 in standard size. Just go ahead and give these just a little torque there, just a little twist. And that one's tight. Same on this one. Just a little bit. And a little bit. Now this outer axle stub is fully locked down. It's not going to go anywhere. You've got your lock plate on. You've got your washer and nut all tightened down. So now we'll move on to getting the shock and sway bar link bolted back on. Let's see. I usually try to get these started by hand. It's kind of a pain being in the trailing arm. It's just good so it doesn't cross thread and have an issue. We'll just go ahead and get this bolt torqued down, and then we'll move on to the sway bar link, and then we'll be all good to go here. All right, torque spec on the shock bolts are 88 foot-pounds. So we'll set our torque wrench here, and then go ahead and get that torqued down. All right, bottom shock bolt is torqued, and now we'll move on to putting the sway bar link bolt back in. Knock that back into place. This bolt goes in with the head side towards the outside of the car. Push up on the bar a little bit, pop that through. Nut goes back on. Fully seated. Then we'll go ahead and torque this one. All right, torque on these end link bolts is also 88 foot-pounds. They're M12 bolt. One more. There's 88 foot-pounds on that bolt. And now all we have to do is throw this wheel and tire back on, and we'll be good to go. Then we'll just run these down very lightly with the impact and torque them to 85 foot-pounds once we're on the ground. That is all you need with the impact on those. Then you'll just finish it off with a torque wrench. Now that we're back on the ground, we'll go ahead and torque these lug nuts to 85 foot-pounds. Cross pattern, of course. 2. All right, there we go. For the greasing part of this video, we're gonna go ahead and use our 2 greases. This is Bel-Ray Anti-Seize, and this is Neo CV500. We mix these at a 50-50 ratio inside these CVs. You can either pre-mix them or do it, or just squirt each into the cup individually, and they'll just mix right away on their own. We just pre-mix here because we have the tools to do it, but this is an optional thing to do. This is a 6 fluid ounce syringe or little kind of grease cup, and this goes inside a caulking gun, and this is filled with half Bel-Ray, half Neo 500, and we'll put a quarter of this into each axle. So that's about 1.5 ounces. You can do 1.5 ounces, 50 cc's, somewhere right in there, depending on what unit of measurement yours has. So we'll go ahead and toss this to start into your caulking gun, just so this is all ready to go for when it's time to go ahead and grease the axles. The next part of this is pulling the grease port screws out of here. They're just a little set screw. They use a 3/16 Allen head. They are right here on the axle. They're not always perfectly aligned with each other, but there's the other one there. There's one on the inner and outer of the rear axles, and then one on the inner of the fronts. And then there's just a grease zerk on the outers underneath the hubcap. So you'll just want to wipe clean around the grease port, just so nothing as far as dirt or any other debris gets into your axle cups, because this could cause damage over time. We'll just wipe those out here. All right, we're going to start with the inner cup. We can use a 3/8 ratchet with a 3/16 Allen socket on there. We're going to go ahead and just pop these loose. They're usually not too tight in there. They bottom out, so just go to that point and really no tighter. They come with a little Loctite on them from the factory, or a thread sealer. That kind of holds them in there. So once we get this out, this boot may start to expand because it'll vent this whole assembly out. Yep, there's that. If you have CV sliders or these are open, it might already be vented, so you won't have to worry about that. But now this cup is ready to grease. So we'll take our syringe here with our grease, get this all situated. All right, this is ready to go in. This has an angled tip on it, makes it way easier to get in there. Go ahead and grease them. And then we're just gonna go ahead and start pumping grease in until we get a quarter of this tube drained down, and then that's how we know this cup is all good to go. So now that we've put a quarter of that tube of grease in here, which is about 1.5 ounces, we're gonna just thread our plug back in and then move on to the next cup. So these, you just gotta thread them in until they bottom out, and just snug them up, nothing too tight. Just make them easy to get out for the next time. These shouldn't go anywhere. It's getting close. Right about there, it's snug. That's all you need to do. And that cup is all good to go. For the outer cups on Hefes and Bandits, you'll have no hole in the arm here. So you need to just get in here with a 3/16 L handle, and then go ahead and crack these ones loose, and then just work them out. On the Diablos, they have a little hole here in the arm, and you're able to just get them cracked loose this way, and then you could turn the L handle sideways and go in through here, and then just spin it out. Takes it a little quicker, but really no different on the procedure. So this applies to all cars the same. All right, now we're going to repeat the process of putting a quarter of this tube into this cup here. We'll go ahead and get in here. This is why the angled tip is nice for this outer cup, because you can kind of push it in and then it'll engage enough without making a mess. Let's go ahead and pump this until we get a quarter of the tube in there. All right, now we're going to throw this plug back in to the axle, and then we'll be all good to go. All right, so same as the inside cup, we'll just run this until it seats down and it's just slightly snug and it won't go anywhere. All right, that's nice and snug, won't go anywhere. And just from here, you'll just kind of wipe off any excess grease that's on the cups, just so nothing more sticks to them, and you're all good to go. Your axles are greased and ready. All right, that's all there is to removing and installing axles and greasing them. If you have any other questions, you can contact us at our service department, either by email or phone during normal business hours. Thank you for watching, and that's all there is.